Jim Richards,
Jim Richards.
good friend of mine, still 50 years later. Love the guy. And I'm sure he will forgive me for the story that I'm going to tell you right now. So Jim comes in and he's walking by and he says, "Priest, come here." And I didn't even know he knew my name, but he calls me over to the coffee pot, which was close where I was working. And he says, "I understand you grew up on a ranch." And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Do you know how to ride horses?" And I said, "Yeah, we had a horse, a couple of horses, in fact. And yeah, I can ride a horse." And he said, "Good." He says, "You're going to ride the whale today."
Hi there. Welcome to the Zoo Dudes podcast with Gary and Larry. I'm Adam Wilcox, your host. Zoo Dudes is brought to you by CypherWorks and the Animal Care and Conservation Academy. We'll get into talking about who those companies are in just a little bit. So the point of the Zoo Dudes podcast is to talk about all things zoological and zoo-related and animal care-related. And what we have to do this are two of the more experienced gentlemen in the zoo world. Let's put it that way. Experienced is a better word than other words we could use, I suppose, for what we are. Anyhow, I want to introduce everybody to Larry Sorel. Larry, say hi to the people.
Hello, everybody.
And Gary Priest. And Gary, hi. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, it is going to be so much fun. I'm really looking forward to it. And if this is what retirement looks like, I'm okay with it.
Bring it on, right?
Yeah.
So what we wanted to start with was, in this first episode, was really introducing you two to everybody who's listening, watching out there, so they get a sense for who you are. I've had the distinct pleasure of getting to know you guys over the last month or two, and I'm just amazed every time I talk to you that there's layers and stories and more layers and more stories. And we're going to get to all that over time. But let's start with just telling people about how you got into this world and a little bit about, your own personal journey. So let's start with Gary Priest, who is retired from the San Diego Zoo and various other adventures. How did that happen, Gary?
Especially now, looking back with the perspective of time, it's like unbelievable. I was fortunate. I was born and raised on the other side of the mountain from Palm Springs, so high desert in Southern California. And my dad was a rancher. And, he was always bringing home animals. He'd be out disking a field or something like that and bring home a flock of baby quail. I can remember one. He found a red racer, which is a very fast snake. I'm surprised. He was pretty good in track, and he got off the tractor. The tractor's still running, and he's chasing down this snake to grab it to bring it home. He came home with an alligator one time. I don't know where he got that because we don't have any in the desert, but we had one. So, just growing up in a ranch environment, we had horses, cattle, sheep, but he was primarily, into apricots, avocados, walnuts, olives, that kind of thing. The livestock was just a small part of it, and was just because we had the space and the interest. And when my grandfather died, he left a horse to my dad, so we had to have a place for the horse. And so I by the time I was a teenager, Lloyd Bridges, Sea Hunt, anything to do with scuba diving, I was all about it. And by the time I got my driver's license, I was a certified diver. And San Diego is only about 90 miles south of where I grew up. And I wanted to be a marine biologist. I just absolutely knew that was what I was interested in. But I also met a girl when I was 14 who just had the cutest smile. And, we dated all through high school. She was a year behind me. And so when she graduated from high school, we got married. And amazingly, she has put up with me now for going on 56 years. So
You're,
it's
you're not you're not so bad, Gary. I like you too. You know?
well, I brought home a snake the other day. She wasn't real happy about that. It was a really cool snake. I've got him in the backyard right now. He's doing really well. California king snake, kind of
Oh,
unusual. You don't see them very often. This is a coastal subspecies, so very unusual. It's got yellow bands instead of white bands. Only found here in San Diego County, so a
I'll try
fairly
to dig
rare
up a
snake.
picture.
Yes, yes. In fact, the only picture I have is him eating a mouse because my son wanted to see what it looked like. And of course, he was grossed out because it's pretty quick. I mean, they're very fast, they're efficient predators. But
Yeah,
anyway,
fast eaters, slow digesters.
yes, absolutely. They burn calories differently than mammals. They just don't burn the energy the way that we do. So one mouse a week is more than enough to keep this guy going. And he's 32 inches long, so he's a respectable snake, although my wife doesn't think so. But anyway, I got my first job in high school working at a mom and pop grocery store at 15 and a half till I graduated from high school. That's where I worked. And so I learned all aspects of the grocery business. And when I came to San Diego to go to college, was hired as a journeyman clerk at a supermarket. Never worked in a supermarket before, but because it was a small store that I grew up in, you know, I knew produce, I knew the meat department, I could do dusting and facing and shelves and checking and all of that. So they hired me as a journeyman clerk right out of the chute, which was good because I
Wow.
was actually making pretty good money at the time. But one of the things that I have noticed in my career, I've always been curious about everything. And the supermarket had a store policy that, and this is in the days before laser scanners. So you had to, by rule, call out the price of every item in the basket. There was no recognition of barcodes. There were no barcodes, you know, so this is really ancient. And what I found is the only way you didn't have to do that is if you were engaged in a conversation with the customer. And so I started guessing people's occupations as they would come through the check stands so that I didn't have to do this mind-numbing work of calling out the price for every item that they were buying as I was checking it in.
It's kind of like incorporating "What's my line" into grocery shopping.
Well, it was so much fun. I mean, here I am in San Diego, you know, a couple of miles away from SeaWorld, right? You know, in Ocean Beach, in a beach community. And I was fascinated by the people. I met a commander in the United States Navy who was a very famous submarine pilot. He was in National Geographic magazine. And I met another, I guess that she was somehow in administration when she came through, and people like to talk about themselves. I also learned that. And so you're engaging them, and they're probably giving you a whole lot more information because they can see you're interested. Well, it turns out this girl was in administration. She was the HR director at SeaWorld. And I hadn't been to SeaWorld. I couldn't afford to go. We were newlyweds, and I could see it out of our bedroom window across the bay. I had driven by it, but I'd never actually gone to it as an amusement park or a theme park. She, we became friends. And she said, you know, we're hiring right now. We're expanding to SeaWorld of Ohio. You know, that was the first year, and we're looking for trainers. And I told her that I grew up on a ranch, you know, and she said, well, you ought to come down and apply. And I couldn't believe it. They hired me. That
Gary,
doesn't happen.
could
That
yeah,
just,
well, I don't think it happens in general, but these days that couldn't happen, could it? I mean, no one's going to hire a zookeeper from the grocery store, right?
no, no, no. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, we in San Diego at the San Diego Zoo, where I spent most of my career, we would have 150 to 200 applicants for every animal related position. And most people had a
Wow.
bachelor's degree. That's just the state of the business now. It's very competitive to get in. For me, you know, just fresh off a bale of hay with a straw in my mouth, it was just amazing.
But
But it
that
was
was probably what made you a good candidate for them, right?
Well, I think so, because that natural curiosity that I have worked really well in that situation. The HR director could see that I like people and I'm fascinated by people. People are endlessly fascinating. And some people, as you learn as a manager, if you've ever managed people, some people are on earth to drive you nuts. So that's going to happen. But
So,
in
Gary,
general,
did at this point in your life, was the dream of being a marine biologist still alive?
well, it was until I started thinking about how do you make a living. As I was actually taking classes in marine technology at San Diego Mesa College. And then it occurred to me, to be a marine biologist, you've got to be out to sea a lot, several months out of the year. And I'm really liking being married to my high school sweetheart. And I'm thinking, I don't know how that would work with the two of us, because we like being together. And then when this job at SeaWorld came up, which by the way was 50% less than I was making at the grocery store. So it was a major financial hit, but I was doing something. I'd go to work in a wetsuit, and that to me was absolutely fascinating. That was very close to being a marine biologist in my mind.
That's probably what you thought a marine biologist was when you were a kid.
Exactly. Exactly. And yeah, so kind of an interesting story. I was 3 weeks employed, and my job was to come in and thaw out frozen fish at 3 o'clock in the morning and prepare all the buckets for all the people who would go out into the areas and do shows all day long. And at that time, killer whales had only been in a managed environment for 4 years. We knew nothing about killer whales, and SeaWorld had a female killer whale named Shamu. It's like Mickey Mouse now. I mean, everybody knows
Oh, yeah.
Shamu, but at that time it was brand new, and I could not believe every morning this guy would come in through the security gate and walk right by my open door, the fish house, all kinds of dead fish hanging out of buckets and stuff, and me there, having been there since 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, this guy would come in every morning in his wetsuit because he'd go out surfing every morning before he reported to work. And it turns out if you lived in San Diego in the early 70s, late 1960s, you would have recognized this guy, because there's billboards all over the place with this guy on a whale's back waving. And he was one of the first people ever to ride on the back of a killer whale. And I couldn't believe that here's this guy who is famous, at least in my mind, and he was famous in his mind as well.
But Gary, what was his name?
Jim Richards.
Jim Richards.
Good friend of mine, still 50 years later. Love the guy. And I'm sure he will forgive me for the story that I'm going to tell you right now. So Jim comes in and he's walking by and he says, "Priest, come here." And I didn't even know he knew my name, but he calls me over to the coffee pot, which was close where I was working. And he says, "I understand you grew up on a ranch." And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Do you know how to ride horses?" And I said, "Yeah, we had a horse, a couple of horses, in fact. And yeah, I can ride a horse." And he said, "Good." He says, "You're going to ride the whale today." And it
Today.
was like, what? And I noticed he was walking oddly. And it turns out for the last couple of days, he had been trying to ride the whale without being in excruciating pain. And he tried doubling up wetsuits. He put in an aluminum plate at the base of his back. It turns out his hemorrhoids had flared. Who knew about hemorrhoids? But he did. Anyway, so I got my big break as a result of some other person's hemorrhoids. And
Wow.
that
You
that
can
that
put
was
that on the
even,
resume.
yeah, yeah. And the instruction, by the way, was, "Look, I'll do the show, but when it comes time to ride the whale," he says, "just get in, sit down on her back. She'll do everything. All you got to do is shut up and hang on." And so that was my instruction. And there was no test. We did it in front of a live audience. And I can't imagine that would ever happen again. But again, this was 50 years ago, so it was a little different.
Yeah. Wasn't that like a little dangerous?
Well, I mean, the whale was probably 10,000 pounds and 16 feet long and had 44 interlocking teeth, and they eat sea lions for breakfast. So, yeah, I knew enough about them to know this is probably crazy, but I wasn't going to turn the opportunity down either, yeah, within no time at all, I was doing whale shows.
And from there, you kind of worked your way up, right?
Or down, according to my wife. One of the parts of the show is where you would stick your head in a killer whale's mouth. Not a very smart move, but I wasn't very smart either. It was just
Wow.
perfect for the job.
Yeah, well, what could go wrong with that?
Absolutely. Well, and that's why we stopped doing it, because that actually did happen one day. A few years later, one of the younger trainers, by this point in time, in a few years, I was a senior person. And one of the guys, I'd taken vacation and he had been working on the head and the mouth, is what we would call it. And we would train it with an empty plastic bottle and train the whale to come up, open its mouth. And, we would put the plastic bottle in its mouth. And as long as it held steady, it would be rewarded for that behavior. And then you'd just replace the plastic bottle with your head. And so this is a very simple transition, and it worked. But one day, he was showing me what he'd done while I was on vacation, and he just jumped right in, didn't check out the whale's attitude or anything, and called her over because it was a new behavior, a different whale. Whale comes up, opens its mouth, he sticks his head in, and she closes her. Not enough to puncture anything, but enough to have his arms go out like that.
Oh my.
She was holding him, and then she let go, but it was like, oh my word.
Wow.
We stopped doing it shortly thereafter, because you figure you do it 10,000 times right, but only wrong once, and that's all it takes.
Yeah, you don't want it to bite the head that feeds it.
Ooh, good one, Adam.
Man. Well, and Gary, from there, I know you ended up managing and being in charge of zookeepers. How did that sort of transition go from being a kind of frontline worker to managing people?
It actually had to do with killer whales and how we were caring for them at that time. So 5 years into my career, I'm still at SeaWorld, and the way we would care for a big animal like a killer whale is anytime there was like bad breath, foul odor, the vets wanted to get a blood sample. That was job one. But at that time, we would have to drain the water out of the pool. And this is in the middle of the night because it involves cranes and a dozen people and a stretcher that you swim the whale into. So the whale is kind of in, like, just picture a hot dog, and the whale is the hot dog in a bun, and the stretcher comes up out of the water, and there are cutouts for the pectoral flippers. And by the way, the pectoral flippers are dark on both sides, both dorsal and ventral. So you can't see a blood vessel at all, but the vets would do it by touch. So they would actually feel a bump, and that's where they would try to go in and take a blood sample. But it sometimes would take 6 or 8 sticks before they would actually get a vial of blood, enough to actually run up some samples, some cultures. So we had done that one night, a dozen people in wetsuits, 2 o'clock in the morning, whales thrashing around. And the head vet, a guy named Lanny Cornell, still here and still a good friend, comes up to me and he says, I'm amazed at what you trainers do. You've got these animals doing things in shows we never even dreamed of. And he said, I understand that the trainers up at Marineland are looking into training their killer whale for voluntary blood collection. And it was like, no way. It had never occurred to me. And he was baiting the hook. And
Right.
As soon as I started thinking about it, it's like, of course. Why couldn't we do that? Why do we have to do this? And it was an epiphany. And so what we did, let me get up and get him here for a minute. These are zoo keys. The killer whale was already trained to roll over on its back and present its tail flukes. That was a behavior we already had. So all I had to do was to make pressure on the, oh, and by the way, The ventral side of a killer whale's tail is white, and it looks like a road map. You can see all the blood vessel, everything. It's just you can pick where you want to stick. And so all I had to do was train the whale to accept the pressure of a key and something dragging over it, so that it would just become desensitized. We're going to hold your whale tail here, and you're going to hold real still while we do this, and including an alcohol swab, because the evaporation is a different sensation. And it took 7 days. And in 7 days, we had a killer whale trained to hold still while a vet tech in street clothes could come down, pick the vein, pop a needle in. The whale didn't even flinch. And it absolutely revolutionized how we cared for animals, because now we were using technology not just to train animals for the performance of shows, but to train them to help us with their health care. And that was a new thought in the 1970s.
Wow. That's fascinating. Gary, we're going to hear so much more about your history and experience over the course of the various podcasts, but I want to turn to Larry Sorel. Larry, I'm in Rochester, New York, and you were here for a very long time running our zoo, the Seneca Park Zoo. Tell us about how you got into this field.
Well, my path was a little bit different than Gary's. I was more growing up, more out in nature, concerned about the environment, understanding and looking at animals in their natural state, and always knew I wanted to be in a zoo. Thought I wanted to be a veterinarian, but grew up in Massachusetts, and at that time there was no vet school in the state. And so, in order to get in a vet school, one of 6 seats in the country, really, at that time, you had to maintain a perfect 4.0 average in college, be the child of an alumni, and also be highly qualified in other experience, extracurriculars, so be the perfect student in order to get into a vet school. And at least in my freshman year, I was far from the perfect student. It was my first chance of independence. I was really having a good time and really didn't maintain the grades like I should have. In fact, threatened multiple times over the summer between freshman and sophomore year to never go back to school again. Did go back to school and switched to more of a understanding nature, evolution, natural ecosystems, conservation, et cetera. That's the direction I took in college, but still wanted to be in a zoo. So I graduated in 1975 from a liberal arts college, believe it or not, with a bachelor in biology. And similar to Gary, though, I had met my wife in high school. We got married after my sophomore year, before my junior year. So there was already an attachment there, but her parents had moved to Southern California. And so I thought, well, I'll just go to California and get in the San Diego Zoo and go from there.
No problem.
So no problem. No problem at all. So we went out there, and I did get an interview at San Diego. So I was almost a colleague of Gary's at one point, but they were offering a part-time warehouseman and part-time zookeeper position at a pay rate that I simply couldn't afford. So that didn't work out. I had to turn them down. We were in the Los Angeles area. So I applied to the Los Angeles Zoo, and it was a city-run zoo. So it was a civil service test. And it seems like about a year after I took the test, I finally got the call to come in and interview for a zookeeper position. Was lucky enough to get it. And from there was able to work all across the zoo. So got broad experience in virtually every part of what it took at the zoo.
Larry,
You were going to
say
say
you were
something?
lucky to get the job. Yeah, you said you were lucky to get the job, but I mean, no one gets a job quite only because they're lucky. Why do you think you got the job? I'm curious.
Well, to a degree, I placed high enough on the civil service test, so I was smart enough to get there. And then I must have impressed the interviewers enough that they didn't manipulate the system to bypass me. So I answered the right questions. I was concerned about the animals, wanted to do a good job, took the public into consideration as part of my why do you want to do this? And also talked about education and conservation. So I think all those little bits and pieces combined got me the job. At the time, there was somewhere around 100 zookeepers in Los Angeles. And I did my first rookie training. Okay, follow this person. They're going to show you what to do, with the only woman out of about 100 zookeepers at the time. And this was 1977.
Wow.
So times have changed a little bit since then. And I think now the last statistics I heard, about 75% of zookeepers are female now. They seem to
That is
have.
an extreme change.
Mhm.
Well, it took a while. It's been 50 years thereabouts, but yes, it's changed an awful lot for a multitude of societal reasons. So spent the first 5 years of my career in Los Angeles, learning the ropes, so to speak, and literally, because I was a keeper, learning the ropes meant you learned how to tie knots and tie animals to restrain them, so you could do things similar to Gary's story about the killer whale, but you couldn't tie up a killer whale. So rather than slinging them, especially the hoofstock and some of the cats, we would tie them up in order to do medical procedures. And it always struck me as this is not a good thing. We need to do something different. I didn't have Gary's background, so I didn't know what the different could be. But it was really, it was cowboying at the time. And you were risking life and limb of both yourself and the animals. One of my most vivid memories is, at the time, Los Angeles Zoo had a large herd of Arabian oryx, a very rare antelope, and they were repatriating them back to the Middle East. And we were literally running into a stall, 3 or 4 people physically grabbing this probably 500 or 600 pound animal with very long, straight horn, grabbing them and stuffing them into a crate and hoping you didn't break a horn, break a leg, get yourself stabbed by the horn, etc. And again, it was exciting and adrenaline. It was, wow, this is cool. But reflecting on it, it's like, okay, thank God we didn't pull a horn off, break a leg of the animal, get a person stabbed, etc. So again, it was kind of, I know we have to do this because it's saving the species or repatriating the species, but there's got to be other ways of doing this. And so, spent my career there, worked, like I said, worked all over, from small animals up to great apes and large birds, delicate birds, just all over, and gradually becoming more and more focused on, I want to have a broader impact. I don't want to just be, these are the animals I'm taking care of. I'm going to do a good job. I'm going to take care of them in the zoo. And that's the extent of it. I really wanted to have broader impact on the natural world, on education, on conservation, and broader across any zoo I was part of. And that meant moving up in some way, shape, or form. So luckily at the Los Angeles Zoo, under Dr. Warren Thomas, they instituted a curator training program. Now, a curator is generally in charge of some specified group of animals, how they're taken care of, who takes care of them, those, and how they come in and out of the zoo, and how they're overall managed. So I was able to work with the mammal curator as the assistant curator, is what they called it, and got that experience out of the field in the office, understanding how those things worked. And for the zoo people out there, it was also at a time when the embryo of the species survival program was beginning, the SSPs. I was part of the discussions of, how do we manage golden lion tamarins in captivity, with the idea that we can reintroduce them into the wild. That was unique, where zoos were sharing resources, sharing animals, voluntarily sharing knowledge. And it was quite an experience to see the old time managers that, if I know how to breed this animal or take care of this animal, I'm not going to share it, because that makes me unique, and I can sell the animals or whatever. And And it seems crazy now, but at the time, that was the standard. You keep what your knowledge to yourself. So the Golden Lion Tamarin was the beginning of that. And that was terribly exciting to me and terribly interesting. I also decided that I really wasn't thrilled with the life in Southern California. To me, there was too many people. And in LA, it was just too much. So between my wife and I, we decided we wanted to try some other things. And that began a journey around the country to the next 5 zoos I was going to be a part of. I went from Los Angeles as a zookeeper to Peoria, Illinois as the general curator in charge of all the animals, and began understanding better and accepting the responsibility, which is, it's a little bit different when you're playing at it than when you're really in charge of it. And so understanding the administrative side of tracking these animals and what at the time was the International Species Inventory System, or ISIS. And at the time, it wasn't all computer. It was literally filling out forms and sending them in so we could track animals as a group on an international basis. Um, and understanding, being in charge of the education department also, and trying to elevate our conservation work, most of which was local. But again, we were in the early stages of elevating some of this. Went from Peoria to assistant director in South Bend, Indiana, and again took on the, okay, now we've got budgeting and other things to understand, and what's the overall role of the zoo in the community? How do you promote the zoo? So all these other aspects. But South Bend got a lot of snow and it was chilly. So went from there, started looking for a southern area, and went to Albany, Georgia, which is about 90 miles
Oh,
north
Benny.
of Albany. Yeah. It was there for about 8 years. It's about 90 miles north of Tallahassee, overall in charge of the zoo. So it was called manager, but it was the zoo director there, reporting to an authority. So a little bit more independent than government run or direct government run, and started to get into exhibit design and construction and those kinds of things. So again, all this time broadening my experience to really the total package of what it meant to make a zoo successful, from people management, animal management, facility management, running the ancillary revenue pieces, food and gift, etc., promotional stuff, just the whole spectrum of what it meant to make a zoo successful and viable. Uh, we it was a two-edged sword. The zoo sat on the edge of a river in an oxbow, and one year in 1996, I believe it was, just north of us around the Macon area of Georgia, they got 25 inches of rain in 24 hours, and it all flowed down to that river. And because of the volume, there was lots of farm dams that broke. There was a dam on that river that was breached and broke, and we were flooded. We had about 8 feet of water in the zoo. Part of
Wow.
that meant uh, uh, desperate trying to do what we could to save animals. And I was in the water trying to get to some animals. Luckily, it was relatively thickly wooded because I was washed downstream a little bit, and the only thing that saved me was all the brush and the wood that was there, or I would have been probably all the way down to um, Gulf of America. Stayed there long enough after the flood and the waters receded. We lost a bunch of animals. We had elephants standing in 3 or 4 feet of water for days. We had bears that were in their holding area in probably in that part of the zoo, 6 feet of water. They were standing there for several days with literally just their nose out of the water so they could breathe, and they survived. Got got recovery on the way, and not professionally diagnosed, but I would say PTSD, post-traumatic effects. And I just had to step away from the profession entirely. I took what I refer to as a sabbatical, a little bit of reflective time. Is this what I want to do? Is this what my future is? Because I was very emotionally invested in everything I was doing. It wasn't just a job, it was what I am. It was what it was my identity. So about a year of introspection, just holding various jobs to pay the bills, and finally decided that yes, I have to get back in. I just don't feel complete without it, and started applying around and finally applied up here to Rochester, a county managed, county owned and run zoo, and was able to make a good enough impression. Again, I think because I knew I had enough experience, knew what I was doing, had the right personality for the county executive that was there at the time, and had the broad experience for what they wanted to do with the zoo and the partnership with the society. So I knew the broad spectrum of everything and could help advance the zoo. A little story about the interview. After coming up once, getting an interview, getting called back, part of the second callback was to meet with the county executive. And you, Adam, you may remember Jack Doyle. He was the county executive.
I
at the
certainly
time.
remember Jack Doyle.
I went,
Yep.
okay. I went to Holy Cross College in Massachusetts. He got his law degree at Boston College in Massachusetts, both Jesuit schools, both rivals of each other in a lot of sports and a lot of areas. And I walked into his office, and he's sitting very imperiously behind his desk and said, "Well, we brought you back up. We wanted to talk to you again, despite the fact that you went to Holy Cross. I graduated from BC." And without thinking, my response was, "Well, I'm glad you overcame your handicap." And he burst
Well
out
done.
laughing. And
Yeah.
I think that's what got me the job, to be perfectly honest, because that was his personality. Didn't know it at the time, but it worked out well. Up here in Rochester, we were here for 20-ish, slightly over 20 years, and we were able to do so many things because I had a great crew, and we were able to put together a wonderful team. It took a little while. Sometimes it was people adapted well to what we were changing from what I would call a 50s style of management and attitude of I'm here to take care of the animals, leave me alone. It's too bad the people come through the gate and bother us. And from a director standpoint is you do what I tell you to do. When you get that done, you come back and check with me. I'll tell you the next thing. And we changed that to empowering people to do their job with the right training, right direction, that people coming through the gate were important. And over the course of time, our memberships grew from something like 12,000 family memberships to over 18,000 memberships. Keepers were doing public programming. Oh my God, I have to talk to people. Well, it became, hey, I enjoy talking to people. Let's do this.
Were you in charge when the Zoo Brew started?
Zoo Brews that you reference was just one more way of attracting younger people off hours to the zoo. It was a revenue producer eventually, but it started out, how do we get this generation that we seem to lose after their kids and excited about it, and then before they start bringing their kids? How do we get that group to come to the zoo? And when Zoo Brew started, we were happy to attract 200 people. That was, oh my God, there's 200 people here. And it was mostly friends, family of staff. It got to the point where we kept raising prices to keep people away. We eventually had to put a cap on it and say, it's sold out. 5,000 people, that's all we can handle at the size zoo we were with the size of the pathways and everything. It became so successful that we had to keep people away in order to be safe and control the crowds. So we
Wow.
accomplished an awful lot, but after 20 years, it was becoming kind of like Bill Murray's movie Groundhog Day, where it's the same thing
Hmm.
over and from my perspective, over and over again. The staff was doing a great job. I wasn't doing much of anything other than kind of overseeing what they were doing. And that was getting boring to me. The zoo was in a great place and tremendously successful, but I felt I needed another challenge. And so a friend of mine up in Watertown, New York, who was the chair of the board of a very small nonprofit zoo up there, called and said, essentially after a couple of conversations, do you want to come up here and essentially help save us? It took a while, but we agreed on a way for me to come up there. I was able to retire, take a state pension, and financially it worked with a couple other things going on. And so went up there in 2018 and kind of walked into a similar situation of the zoo was sort of stuck in the past, was kind of stagnant, wasn't really doing much, and was able to re-energize the board. Board was very enthusiastic. We were able to focus the board a little bit more, get a strategic plan done. Out of that, the intent to do a master plan and some other things. And so that 2018 was just familiarization. 2019 was let's get the strategic plan in place and all of that. And with the intent of just carrying right on into 2020 and 21, 22, implementing all this wonderful stuff out of the strategic plan. Well, we all know what happened in 2020. Some
We do.
virus struck and really caused havoc. And our focus went from what are we going to do? What are we going to achieve to how do we survive? And so for the next couple years, it was just survival mode. What do we need to do? How do we manage all the issues that came out of COVID? 23, we were starting to put things back together, but the financial damage done was significant. And we, at the end of 2023, we just, for all intents and purposes, ran out of money, or pretty close to ran out of money. We had to close the zoo. We thought permanently, turned out to be temporarily because the community really stepped up. But it was time for me. I had promised them 5 years. I ended up going beyond that by several months. We got pieces in place where I felt I could walk away. The physical and emotional stress of COVID and survival and all of that just got to the point where I felt I wasn't being effective anymore. And so I stepped away and fully retired with the intent of playing golf and fishing for the rest of my life. That didn't turn out the way I thought. I couldn't stand not doing and being productive and really keeping the zoo as part of what I do, a reduced part because I do have other interests now, but I still like that contact. And my interest, my focus really is again, a little bit different than Gary's. It's extraordinarily important to do the training and zookeeper training and animal training, but I focus a little bit more on education, conservation. How do zoos stay relevant? How do we fit into the new world and the future world that's being built?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love how, similar and different you guys' paths are and where you ended up, where you were in the zoos that you worked and where your focus was, I think gives us this great broad perspective for the show, for the podcast, which is just terrific. Speaking of, you both mentioned training and education many, many times in the last 40 some minutes. And I'm wondering if you can, each of you and either of you can go first. Well, let's go to Gary because we've been hearing from Larry. Tell me a story about how the training of the people is essential. How a training initiative or anything related to that was really important.
Okay. Well, after I left SeaWorld and a few years passed and some different career opportunities, but I had an opportunity. San Diego Zoo was looking for specifically an animal trainer for sea lions. And, my wife was pregnant, and it's like they offer benefits, and so that became very attractive. Plus, I always missed the animal business. I was doing other things, but it wasn't marine biology by any stretch. And so, long story short, I was hired at San Diego Zoo, and as Larry was describing his history from a executive director's position. I remember all of those periods. I was considered an animal trainer, and what is an animal trainer doing in a zoo? Oh, he's from SeaWorld. It's all about shows, and that sort of thing. The other perspective might be that shows attract people and hold people longer, so they spend more money and better support the zoo's mission work. But at any rate, I had an opportunity to work with several different animals at the San Diego Zoo, applying operant conditioning and training elephants in the 90s. We were losing 2 elephant keepers a year nationally.
And by losing, you mean losing
2
them.
elephant-related fatalities annually. Yeah. And when there are only 600 people training elephants nationally, that's a significant number. And then it happened to us at the safari park. We had a trainer killed by an elephant. And it was, my phone rang, and it was, get out to the safari park. We got to figure out a different way to handle this species. We don't go in with polar bears. Why are we going into the animal's environment with an animal that is 50 times the size of a human and can pull trees out of the ground with their trunks? So those very basic questions, we were doing it because 4,000 years of human history said that's what you do with elephants, and times change. Thinking changes, and you have to be open and ready for what that is. We started working with elephants using operant conditioning with the idea of staying outside a physical barrier and training the animal to come to us. So it's voluntary compliance. Well, that worked out, and we had 2 of the largest herds of elephants in the country at the time between the zoo and the safari park, 35 miles to the north. And so we did proof of concept. We did with both species, Asian and African, male and female, and we got the same results. So all of a sudden my phone started ringing, and it was people who wanted help with their elephant management programs. So getting back to the question about training people, I can remember traveling all over the United States to zoos to introduce this concept, and standing at the podium looking out at my audience, it was uniform. The people in the first couple of rows are leaning forward into the chair. Here's this guy from San Diego. What's he going to teach me, and all of that. There's a middle group that are kind of, they're like, okay, prove it, and then there's the back group in the very back row of the auditorium, and they're gone. They're done. They're not going to learn anything in there. And so I would focus my attention on working with those people in the front and in the middle section. I couldn't do anything to change someone's opinion that had been at that zoo for 25 years, and that's just the way we do it. So I didn't spend a lot of energy worrying about it. But those...
Yeah, Gary, you've talked a lot when we've talked about change management. I know that's near and dear to your heart.
Oh, yeah.
As an important idea in the zoo world. It's a buzzword in the business world, but where you are, it's so essential. And I know that you guys both have been a big part of a lot of the change management that's happened sort of in American zoos. So we're gonna get into that in future episodes for sure.
All right.
So how about you, Larry? You got a story for us about educating zoo people?
Well, it's interesting, and I'll use tag on to what Gary was saying with elephants, because that's really a fairly dramatic one. I came in late. The zoo came in late in the operant conditioning for elephants. We had a crew that was just, we're going to go in with elephants. that's it. That's the way you do it. I know we can do it that way. Believe in my heart from the keeper standpoint. I believe in my heart that being in with the elephants is the best way to care for elephants. Period. You can't convince me otherwise. And I went to my really first in-depth exposure was the conference, the gathering, and more of a gathering than a conference that we had at Disney World that was focused on elephants. Probably, what would you say, Gary? 2010-ish, 2013 maybe, something like that,
Yeah.
where it was really, guys, we can't go on this
Something's
way.
got to
Too many
change.
people are getting hurt.
Yeah.
Something's got to change. And I went down there just myself and had this epiphany and then had to bring it back to the zoo here in Rochester and talk to these ingrained elephant people that were just absolutely convinced that going in with them was the best way. It wasn't that they were stubborn, but they truly believed that that was the way you had to take care of animals best. And so we started talking about it, talking about risk management and evidentiary proof. And that went on for about a year. And then we had another gathering of elephant holders in St. Louis. Again, I think it was about a year later, something like that. And I brought my senior elephant keeper at the time. And it was a woman, and she was just absolutely convinced you have to go in with the elephants. And it wasn't that she was this big woman who was imposing. She was fairly slight and small, but she was just convinced that you had to dominate the elephants so you could control them and take care of them right. She walked out of that meeting with, thankfully, and it was a 2 or 3 day meeting, and she walked out of it, okay, I think I've seen the light. And we were able to work together.
Larry, what do you think got her to that point? What got her to be willing to change sort of a lifelong, deeply held value?
I think it was just this exposure to people that she admired that were changing also. So almost peer pressure, but peer support that it can be done. This is what we're done. Here's the pictures of what we're doing. Here's video of what we're doing. See how successful it is. And we're not getting people hurt. And so it was, okay, well, I guess. At first, and then she got more enthusiastic about it. So we were able to get together and work with the elephant staff, go through that whole education, moral support, repetitive behavior, proof of concept. And the disadvantage we had in some ways being a government zoo is civil service. So I could say, get with the picture or go. Didn't have that option, had to work with the people in place to get them to buy in. Plus, I truly believe if they didn't buy in properly, they weren't going to do it right anyway. And so finally, there was one more serious injury, and I can't remember what it was, where actually it happened in sort of protected contact, but they weren't doing it right. Somebody leaned into the cage and got crushed. I'm not sure if she died, he or she died, or was just severely injured. And that was sort of the turning point where, yes, okay, we're going to do it. And then I was able to issue the mandate, you're not going in, only under these certain circumstances, which was part of the whole AZA program. AZA had changed its accreditation standards for how to care for elephants. So there was a lot of pieces that I could pull on and pull it all together and get it in place. But the most important thing was it wasn't imposed upon them. We were able to work with them and get them to buy in. There was a little bit of change of staff, but it was voluntary. But it was really more leadership from the keeper in charge of the section and working with them on a daily basis, and then me coming in periodically, more frequently at the beginning, less so as time went on, where they trusted me and my decisions relative to specifically elephants. I'd be down in the elephant barn at the beginning almost every day, just checking on things, talking to them, supporting them, and then gradually less and less. So it was my perspective, a human resource management from the lead keeper, senior keeper's perspective. It was people management and elephant management. It all worked together to create what I think was a fantastic program.
That's great. I rode an elephant in India, and I think if I'd had this conversation with you guys, I wouldn't have. But I'll tell you, riding an elephant gives you a totally different perspective on elephants.
Mm-hmm.
When you're standing looking at them, they're really big. When you're on top of one, they're way bigger.
Oh yeah,
They're
it's
large
kind of like
animals.
being on a yes, it's kind of like being on a diving board. The 10-foot platform doesn't look that high when you're on the ground looking up, but you get on that 10-foot platform and look down. It's a lot higher than
Absolutely.
you expect it to be.
Yeah. So, Larry, tell me something you're looking forward to with the podcast. What are you hoping we do? What do you know we're going to do?
Well, I think, again, from my perspective, what I'm interested in my history is give people, not just zoo people, but people, perspective on the impact of zoos in education, wildlife education, and conservation, and what we do on a global scale with relatively limited resources, and how we bring out the importance of the natural world and the impacts that people have on our environment, on our wildlife, etc. It seems like it's a losing battle often. But if you approach it positively and get enough people enthusiastic and knowledgeable about it, I think we can continue to change the world and stay relevant in the U.S. and North America to the importance of it and how it fits into a global picture.
You're just an old hippie, Larry.
I know.
I love it. So, Gary, what are you looking forward to covering and talking about as we go forward with the podcast?
Oh, wow. We're at such a critical point in time in human history, and I think this generation has an amazing challenge, an amazing opportunity. I one of the last opportunities I had to publish something was sort of on this topic, and it's what is the challenge for this next generation, and that seems to me to be about the most important thing that we can be talking about. If you think historically, in the 19th century, we underwent the Industrial Revolution, and the result of that was we could build machines that could harvest resources faster than the earth could replenish. And that wasn't something we understood immediately, but towards the end of the 19th century and certainly into the 20th century, we realized you could look at whaling, and when it was just a harpoon and a few guys in a skiff, it was sustainable because it was just so hard. But when they had ships that had motors and bomb lances, whales could be harvested very, very quickly, and the populations crashed as a result. And we're fortunate that protections came in when they did. Otherwise, many of the whales that currently exist in the oceans would be gone. They would be extinct. The blue whale kind of at the top of the list. Blue whales have a heart the size of a Volkswagen Bug. I mean, they're a massive animal. They're really something to see, and I've had the great good fortune to see several in the wild. So it's amazing. It's like an island coming up out of the water, and it takes your breath away, literally. So I think our generation, this next generation, following what we did, I was in the right place at the right time with an amazing technology called operant conditioning, and being able to do things for the very first time with animals that to help them help us care for them, and train them to voluntarily cooperate. And now that is absolutely standard, business practice in the zoological industry and in the aquariums. It's so exciting for me to see some of the innovations taking place, same technology, but applied to a different species in a different way. and it absolutely is exciting for me to sort of look back at the start of it and having had a small hand in disseminating that and to what it is today. But it's even more important because, as we go from the 19th century and the Industrial Revolution to the 20th century and 2 world wars, now we're in the 21st century, almost 8 billion people on the planet. And this next generation has an opportunity, the only opportunity that will ever come, because if we don't do it in this next generation, it won't get done. And many of the species, the Earth species of plants and animals, will be gone, and there won't be any retrieval of them that we can foresee right now. They'll just be gone. That genetic diversity, that inheritance that we've all enjoyed, is threatened right now. And so I think the two areas that I would like to see our podcast go is to encourage zoos with the collective appreciation of plants and animals. Zoos already do that. They have done that for a long, long time, and that still is an absolute priority in my mind, is to be able to go. Most of us won't ever go to Africa and see the plains animals in the Serengeti migrate. That's a rare privilege. Um, uh, but zoos can replicate that, and they do amazing work. Now, with the natural habitat exhibits, animals are encouraged to perform natural behaviors and also cooperate for veterinary care. So that is one of our missions. The second mission, I think, is to apply all of our energies in the zoological industry and the new technologies as they develop to be able to maintain the biodiversity that we have and work together with people who are managing these animals in the wild. There really isn't any wild left anymore. Virtually all animal populations on Earth are managed to some degree, one way or the other, whether it's in national parks or whatever. So zoos really have an amazing role in learning more from very small captive populations about those larger populations that are still out there. So it's a combined effort: zoological best practice and a modern in situ conservation. And I see that as a big area for the remainder of this century, for the next 75 years.
Well, that's a heck of an answer, Gary. Thank you. I hope we can actually do justice to those topics. Those are big topics.
They really are. They're big thoughts, but it's imperative. If we don't do it, every generation. Here's the best story I can think of. 400 years ago, as sailing ships were starting to go around the Horn of Africa from Europe and explore the world, there's an island, Mauritius, and that island had a bird that was about the size of a turkey called a dodo. And what we didn't know is that bird, it was a flightless bird. It was easy prey and apparently tasted pretty good. And there were hungry sailors that would land at that island. And one of the first things they would do is restore the provisions for their journey. And these birds had never seen humans before, and so they weren't afraid. And so it was like a lunchbox with feathers. And unfortunately, the last dodo was killed and eaten by a sailor 400 years ago. We'll never have that species back. It's gone. 400 years extinct now. And that will be the story of the future unless we round the bend and just do a better job of conservation and understanding that our biological resources aren't unlimited. There is a limit. the Earth is that big, and a lot smaller when you're looking at it from the moon. So we live in a paradise, and it just has to be our top priority is to maintain that biological wealth that we have inherited so that we can pass it on to the next generation and the technologies and opportunities that they will have that maybe we didn't.
You're reminding me of Dr. Seuss's book, The Lorax.
Yes.
When the Lorax is taken away, all that's left is a stone with the word unless.
Wow. That was very profound, Adam.
Well, very, very profound, Dr. Seuss. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Adam.
I'm a curious person, and I like learning. And what I'm hoping is we're all going to learn together. In future episodes, we're going to have guests from zoos all over the country, all over the world, we hope. And they'll come on and they'll talk about what they're doing, why they're doing it. We're going to have more on elephants, of course. We'll have Komodo dragons. We'll have all kinds of things. We'll also talk about running zoos and the place zoos have in society. So we hope people will join us, that you'll come back and listen to Gary and Larry. And thanks, guys. This has been a real pleasure.